Hello again, friends. Welcome to the final session of our conference. It's going to be a dilly. It's going to be far the longest session, and so if Catherine was able to stagger in exhausted and do a magnificent performance as she just did with us, I think we can all muster the energy to continue for the rest of the afternoon. My name is Richard Harmston. I'm a longtime member of the Group of 78 and past chair as well. We have what we call a civil society circle. We discussed how we could make that a real circle, but take it as a metaphor. But circle in the sense that we're all engaged, and we will invite you, as you've seen from the program in the second part of the session this afternoon, to engage fully as you can with your own ideas and suggestions. So where do we go from here? The we in this is civil society, both in Canada and around the world. Citizens banding together, primarily through voluntary effort, to achieve a common goal. And where are we going? It's a question of what initiatives, actions, strategies can we devise and launch and build upon those that are already in existence. And we've had a good list of those come to us in the conference so far. To accelerate climate action by governments, yes, but also the private sector, and we've touched on that in the conference as well, and the rest of civil society, because it means mobilizing our neighbors and our communities and the many people who are not engaged in this. What goals do we set for ourselves collectively? How can we collaborate more effectively? As someone who's spent most of his life in civil society, I recognize how sovereign organizations can be, civil society organizations can be. And as a friend pointed out some time ago, it's interesting that the corporate world has many more mergers than civil society does, and I wonder why that is. I mean, I've got an answer to that, which that's tangent. We won't go into it at the moment. But there is a sense of sovereignty among civil society organizations, and yet the needs we're trying to deal with in our struggle against climate change beg for collaborative and cooperative action. The task is immense, as has been painted for us very, very clearly by particularly Sephora yesterday kicking it off with her keynote, but also continuing through to today with Kat's presentation on all of the intricacies at the international negotiating level. The task is immense. How do we reverse the consumption of fossil fuels to have the industry, for energy purposes at least, wither away and die, preferably in the lifetime of some of the people in this room. Some of us may not see that, but we hope that the younger people can see that comfortably within their lifetime. I mean, that goal is ambition writ large. I have asked our panelists this afternoon, our speakers, two questions to guide their remarks to us today. One, what briefly is your agency doing now in terms of advocacy and public mobilization for climate action? And two, what does civil society need to do, civil society writ large, in Canada and globally, and preferably in collaboration, to get publics and government to curb the climate crisis? Time is not our friend this afternoon, unfortunately. We're running a bit late to start this session, but we have the best part of a couple of hours. And the format is that our guest speakers will speak each for a few minutes to speak to the questions and anything else that they would like to share with us. And then following that, we won't take a formal break, but I'll invite you on, on one or twos or small groups to slip out and get some refreshment, including allowing our panelists to do this as well. We want them to stay refreshed and come back in. But otherwise, we will keep the session going until wrap-up time. And we invite all participants to add to what you hear with your own ideas on action. Action that will make a difference towards mobilizing citizens on a large scale and getting governments to act much more seriously. The longer bios are online, and as we've done in the earlier part of the conference, I'm not going to read those in detail for the interest of time, but I will introduce each of our colleagues here at the front. Robb Barnes, starting at the end, is the Climate Program Director at the Canadian Association for Physicians for the Environment. Robb was previously the Executive Director of Ecology Ottawa, as well as the Capacity Building Institute. In the middle, who will be speaking first, Angela Keller-Herzog is the Executive Director of the Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability, CAFES. And I wanted to ask if CAFES serves good donuts. But I'll catch you on that later. Angela's been with us throughout the conference, has already contributed, so no stranger to us here. Akaash Maharaj, Director of Policy of Nature Canada. Akaash works to strengthen the policies of Canada's federal, provincial, and Indigenous governments to protect and conserve wildlife and habitats across our country. He has a special commitment to the implementation on the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Lisa Gu, second from your left, is an associate director, is a national program manager at the David Suzuki Foundation, but based here in Ottawa, appropriate for policy work, where she worked since 2007 on a range of federal legislative, regulatory, and budget campaigns in various political contests. And last but not least, Julia Levin with Environmental Defense. Julia is an Associate Director at Environmental Defense with the National Climate Team and is Environmental Defense is a leading environmental advocacy organization. In her current role, she works to advance ambitious climate and energy policy. I do refer you to the full bios in on our website when you have a chance to read them. We do have here, a rich array of experience and depth and breadth of experience in these five people, and they, along with the other speakers we've had at the conference, are representatives of the front line in the fight against climate change. So we are very grateful that they're always all able to participate and give us some guidance on where we go. So where do we go from here? Starting with you, Angela.
Okay, so I get to go first. I'm just going to stand up just because I've been sitting down all this time, and this is my excuse, and this will make it more interesting. So I'm going to start off with just answering your question about whether cafes serves good donuts. So if I wasn't here right now, I would be at the Carp Fair. And at the Carp Fair, Cafes has a quite large booth next to the booth of EFCO, which is where Raymond would be if he wasn't here. And we are serving free solar popcorn. So we have a solar panel that's connected to a little battery that is connected to a little popcorn maker. And so that demonstrates about how renewable energy and energy storage can work. This is very relevant because there's a big brouhaha in Ward 5, which is where CARP is, about a battery energy storage proposal, a 250 megawatt proposal by Brookfield Renewables, and there's some local opposition. So this is part of our local context. Now, everybody in this room has heard the phrase, think global and act local, right? Yes, I'm getting some nods here. So this, I think, is actually the most important aspect of climate action. And when Kat Abreu was challenging us to stay engaged at the international level, well, I would challenge all of us here to very much stay engaged at the local level. That's where 50% or more of the emissions happen in urban centers. And a lot of the decisions by municipal government are actually the decisions that matter. So in terms of what happens with our public transit, do we have electric buses? Do we have public transit that works? What are the parking regulations? What is the urban planning like? Do we have green building standards? What happens with our organics, our compost, right? Does it go in the landfill and cause methane, or do we do something better with it? So all of these are local decisions. And Raleigh, who was here yesterday, he likes to say, Angela, the local stuff is so murky. I don't really know what goes on with that. It's scary. So that's the role of cafes. So we have the municipal sandbox of issues, and our mandate is to support our members' local neighborhood initiatives. So we're a network. We have individual and organizational members, of which group of 78 is a member of cafes now, I'm happy to say. We support advocacy pushes, and we do some of our own analysis and engagement around that. And we also look to build community, because many people who are becoming anxious, it's very difficult to do anything just as a solo individual, right? It feels very overwhelming. But as soon as we start having a group of people, we can cut through that static and that fear. So in terms of the advocacy work that we do then, a lot of it is reactive, because in order to engage with the municipal agenda, we have to deal with what comes up on the committee agenda. So last week it was idling, and Ottawa was talking about revising the municipal bylaw on idling, which is connected to emissions. So we were there, we made a public delegation. This time we had the majority on our side. So we have our little victories, and of course also our defeats. Part of engaging with the municipal and local issue of the day then also allows us to engage with the residents. And for that, Cafes has set up, we convene several circles. We have a climate caucus, we have a trees and green space caucus, and we have a waste and circular economy caucus, where we bring people together to deliberate about what advocacy positions we should take. So that's so to inform, to connect, and then to empower people to go talk to their local councillors. That's basically what Cafes does. So that was part one of what I'm supposed to talk about, and then part two, I'm supposed to provide you with the vision and the solution, and what should we be doing now going forward, thinking strategically. And I think I was at a talk that included the German Minister of State, Jennifer Morgan, I think a week or week and a half ago. And she said one thing that really resonated very strongly with me. She said, we have to take it to the people. And I think that given that we are almost on the cusp of a more populist right-wing government coming in, that is going to be probably rolling back a lot of central government programming on climate. We need to think about that. How are we going to deal with that situation? And I think that this take it to the people, if I can unpack it at 3 different levels. I think, first of all, we need to take the climate conversation to the people. And this is why it's good for cafes to have our solar-powered popcorn at the carp fair, because we're trying to talk to people and demonstrate that renewable energy works and why it's important and all these things, and then you can also have a free cookie. And at the second level, I think if we look at the kinds of policies and programming that we should be thinking about in terms of our strategies, I think it has to be things that engages the people. So we need to think about how can tenants have heat pumps? Can we have condensers sitting on the balcony? Can we have window models, which apparently in New York they have? Can we push so that the energy retrofit of a home is not just the privilege of like well-heeled people with nice houses, right? Can we think about transportation options, like obviously, again, good public transit, maybe subsidies for electric bikes? Are there, like, as we look at the policy options, are there ways that we can find programming that takes the climate action to the people? And by that, I'm not trying to say that we should make people feel guilty. I'm saying this: we should develop pathways to make it possible for regular people who are squeezed with the affordability crisis to take action. Like that, I think, should be part of our lens. And the third thing that I think we need to do in terms of taking it to the people, I think we need to take this upcoming period as an opportunity to find our people and to connect, to build capacity and to build leadership. So that if we can be working collaboratively, we can be working in networks, and then civil society can function better. We have to definitely safeguard against any kind of like conflict, infighting, working together, but building leadership. And that's, for me, another version of also taking it to the people, bringing people in and developing their capacity. I'm going to end on a note of optimism. I found part of this morning quite difficult, right? It seemed that a lot of the UN level struggles with non-proliferation have been hard, right? There's been decades and decades of struggle. But from what I've been reading, the shift to renewables is basically unstoppable, because renewables are now like cheaper, more cost effective, they're less polluting, they're more nimble. Our electricity grids are going to need increased power and capacity, both in generation and storage. So with that kind of muscular sort of fitness advantage on the side of our team, I think that there is definitely very strong hope that the renewables are going to be phasing in just because of those just like facts and realities. So I'll stop there.
Rob, can I call on you? Do you have some slides, or are you not? You're not going to use them. Good. Robb Barnes, please.
Thank you very much. And always hard to follow Angela. I don't know where you get your energy, Angela. And I've worked alongside Angela for many years, and I've seen just amazing work at cafes, especially when I was at Ecology Ottawa, working alongside Angela in many, many contexts. I think we were basically workmates at that point. So my name is Robb Barnes. I'm the Climate Program Director at the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Because it's a big, long, clunky name from the mid-90s, some of these nonprofits ended up having these giant names. It goes by CAPE, or ACME en français. And CAPE is a physician-led national environmental charity working at the intersection of environment and health. And it's physician-led basically in three ways. Physicians run the board of directors, physicians are our media spokespeople, and we actually have grassroots networks of physicians all across the country who are organizing, often around provincial politics, and feeding in to CAPE's national campaign structure. I often warn people at the beginning of any one of my talks, I'm not a doctor, and that's just so you know. I will run in the opposite direction of any kind of medical emergency. I'm just kidding. But I am not a doctor. My background's in policy and advocacy. And as Richard mentioned, I spent a long time thinking about city-level environmental issues too at Ecology Ottawa. In terms of what we do, so CAPE is a fairly broad organization. We do some work on toxics. We've got a great campaign to ban fossil fuel advertising and fossil fuel misinformation. And whereas that campaign is streamlined and structured and branded, the stuff that I work on is in many ways the kind of the trash compactor of CAPE. It's anything that's climate related that doesn't touch on fossil fuel ad bans. So as the climate program director, I like to boil my work into three things: mitigation, adaptation, and international work. I feel like a Grateful Dead fan who kind of follows the band around from show to show. I saw Kat's presentation in Montreal yesterday, and I'm back again. I saw again in Ottawa. So the COP process is a very important part of what CAPE does on an annual cycle. And with any luck, we'll be in Baku. At least a few of us will be in Baku again this year, trying to influence domestic policy from the international angle. But I want to talk more about the mitigation and the adaptation piece. And, you know, if you think about where health and environment intersect, on adaptation, the answer can be fairly obvious, right, when you read into it. You think about how do we react and respond to the climate impacts already baked into the system. And we're talking about wildfires, we're talking about extreme heat, we're talking about drought, we're talking about zoonotic diseases, we're talking about floods. All the fire and brimstone that comes with climate change. That you can now read about on mostly a daily basis, unfortunately. And certainly that's a portion of what we do, you know, and what I do. About maybe 30% of my work is on adaptation, and that's everything from organizing at the local level to talk about heat-related deaths to getting funding and implementation for something called the National Adaptation Strategy, a very vaunted strategy that basically no one's heard about. Another great comms rollout from our friends at the federal government. In any case, the National Adaptation Strategy, or NAS, has been rolled out, and Trudeau periodically brags about it on an international stage. It has yet to see much funding or implementation, so it's at risk. And I work with Lisa and others to kind of push the levers in terms of funding for that piece, the NAS. But I want to talk about mitigation a little bit, because sometimes we see the complexity of climate challenges, right? And you know, you'll see the pie chart. I'm sure everyone here in this room has seen the pie chart. Okay, oil and gas is this much, transportation is this much, agriculture is this much. We're talking about how they feed into the national emissions profile. And the interesting thing to do is to kind of almost cover all of those differentiated pieces and think about what's really behind them, right? When you think about what's behind transportation emissions, it's oil and gas. When you think about what's behind oil and gas emissions, it's oil and gas. When you think about what's behind any kind of industry emissions and industrial emissions, it's often oil and gas. So oil and gas is at the root of many of our problems, and I would also contend so does animal agriculture plays a major role as well. But on the oil and gas side, on the mitigation side of work, we're really looking at air pollution impacts, right? And as it turns out, the science is both robust and quickly evolving. There are many papers about the air pollution impacts of fossil fuels, and yet we keep on discovering, you know, in this line of work, and I've been at CAPE for 2 years, every few months there's some barn burner of a new paper talking about, you know, we haven't detected this before, or as it turns out, we've been undercounting emissions. If anyone's following the methane file, you'll notice that the trend is, oops, you know, we thought it was half of what we were emitting. Turns out it's, you know, multiple times that amount. So all this is to say, those are some emerging trends, and air quality is one of those pieces that really connects to people where they live. You know, I heard what Angela was talking about, connect with your neighbors, and part of what CAPE does or tries to do is connect with people around health, right? It's one thing to talk about climate change, which is, I think, a large part of the reason we're all in this room, right? You know, existential, long-term catastrophe with we're already starting to feel many of the effects on a daily basis. But it's another thing to talk about the day-to-day health impacts and to connect with people who might not otherwise consider themselves part of the climate community or part of the climate conversation, because health touches every single one of us in a very direct way. And so when we think about climate mitigation, we should think about air pollution. And when we think about air pollution, we think about health and how mitigating climate change is in so many ways, the near-term health benefits from tackling the climate crisis are very substantial. Happy to go into more of that information, but that's just a quick overview of what CAPE does and what my work involves as the climate program director. There was a second question that we were given, to prepare for, which is what should the environmental movement or civil society be doing more of? And here I would say, I think maybe picking up on what Angela said and what I was trying to do when I was at a college in Ottawa is talk to people whose opinions we don't already know. I think that's absolutely critical and something the environmental movement routinely fails to do, which is to talk to people who might disagree with us or who might be socially conservative but have similar values when it comes to environmental ideas. And here I would refer to there's a really excellent organization that is incubated at Carleton University, just started up. It's called RE-Climate, so re.climate. And they're a national think tank, research tank, and what they're doing is processing all of the kind of communications elements around climate change. How do we communicate this better? And they have a really interesting analysis that they've done a lot of work on that was started by folks at Eco Analytics, which is another kind of comms firm working for nonprofits. And what they've done is they've broken Canada up into 5 pieces. Progressive activists, who I imagine is basically everyone in this room, very small subset of the electorate, as we probably know. When you're knocking on doors or talking to your family, you're like, wait, I'm not normal? No, you're not. So that's the progressive activists, but there are these really interesting subsets of the community that we can appeal to. Centrist liberals come up, some folks who are in the so-called disengaged middle, and some folks who they're calling civic nationals who have a variety of perspectives. It's a bit of a grab bag category, but again, sometimes these socially conservative values, but value things like proximity to nature and caring for their children like everyone else. And so there are groups that we can't reach, right? And what they would call the fossil fuel conservatives. Do you want to have that debate with your uncle at Thanksgiving? Probably not. Skip to the persuadables. But there are many more persuadables outside of the traditional folks that sometimes the environmental movement, I find, or civil society more generally, likes to talk to, right? We like to talk to ourselves. We like to kind of pump ourselves up. And I was chatting with Lisa before we started. Sometimes that's valuable. There's a utility in that, absolutely. But certainly if we want to win and if we want to see political progress, talking to unusual suspects is absolutely critical. And so I think that that's something the environmental movement could really benefit from doing more of. And it might involve even starting up entirely new organizations that are designed to talk to those subsets of the electorate instead of referring people back to our traditional organizations. And I should just say that even though I'm saying these critical things about the environmental movement, every organization represented on this stage has campaigns that do talk to those unusual suspects. So it is happening. I think it's maybe in a more embryonic form than I'd like to see. I'd like to see it grow and really get pushed forward. And then finally, on that front, when we're talking about anything related to climate change, and this might sound like an odd statement, but I do think that the environmental movement should increasingly own the lane on patriotism. I think we should wrap ourselves in Canada flags when we talk, because I think failing to do that means that we're losing before we start. I see that in the US with the Democratic election with the Democrats and Kamala Harris. If you could count the number of American flags in that room, you'd be hard pressed. It would be like one of those games where you're just guessing at the number of jelly beans. There's a lot, right? And I think that what the Democrats are doing is very consciously trying not to lose again on the kind of, do you love your country enough to be talking to me in the first place? I think that the environmental movement increasingly is a little reticent to be proud of where we come from, and I'm increasingly saying, drape yourself in a Canada flag and have that conversation with that difficult neighbor. Maybe not too difficult, but somewhat difficult, right? And the persuadable middle. So that's where I'd encourage us to go as civil society, and look forward to your questions and conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob. Akaash, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I couldn't help but feel that when Rob was talking about difficult people, he was looking right at me. My name's Akaash Maharaj. I'm with Nature Canada. It's one of Canada's oldest conservation organizations. So we're celebrating our 85th anniversary this year. We have about 200,000 individual members across the country and about 1,600 member organizations. And our members, be they organizations or individuals, are all naturalists. That is to say, people who enjoy nature. It's not the same thing as naturist, which are people who like to walk around with no clothes on. Unfortunately, I found that out before my first day at work. But the important thing about our members is that they are in their local communities. They enjoy hiking, camping, bird watching, just enjoying the natural world. And as a result, what our organization does is in many ways an unusual combination of local service and national policy. We work with those local groups and those individuals to help them protect the areas, the lands, the waters, the species that they personally enjoy, that they like to see, that they want their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren to be able to enjoy. But we also have a strong hub of public policy in Ottawa, where we try to shape the decisions of governments across our country, and to a certain extent, international decisions, so that the public overarching public policy framework will support those efforts rather than erode them. There's an obvious connection to climate change here, and that is that the single greatest threat to species and biodiversity in our world is climate change. It's not the only one. It's also in a sort of vicious circle with things like irresponsible industrial practices, over-intensive agricultural practices, deforestation. But climate change is at the top of the list. And I'm not going to pelt you with a catalogue of woe. I think everyone who is involved in this sector is accustomed to that. But I will just very briefly say that the impact of all of these factors on biodiversity and on conservation in our world has been catastrophic. We really are going through what many scientists refer to as the sixth mass extinction in our planet's history, and it bears the name the Anthropocene, because unlike the previous 5 mass extinctions, we are doing this to ourselves. We're not being hit by a meteor, we're not suffering some kind of planetary natural disaster. We are doing this to ourselves. And currently, although the extinction of species is a natural part of the long-term circle of life on our planet, we are currently seeing about a rate of extinction that is about 1,000 times the natural rate. There's been a 69% decline in vertebrates, an 83% decline in freshwater fish, and about 38% of all the remaining species are either threatened or near threatened for extinction. One of the figures that really stands out in my mind is that amongst mammals, only about 4% of mammalian biomass in our world is wildlife. The other 96% are human beings and domesticated animals. We have effectively wiped out all of the wild mammals on our planet. So having depressed you, there is good news here, and that is that from a policy perspective, people can see and feel the loss of habitat and the extinction of species in ways that I could only hope they would see and feel climate change. So that is changing now that we're seeing more and more extreme weather events. But as a result, on an international level, we have relatively recently seen the conclusion of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which is easily one of the most consequential treaties that no one has ever heard of. But it calls upon the countries of the world to protect 1/3 of the lands and seas across our planet. And virtually all the countries on our planet have signed that convention and have ratified it. The United States, you'll not be surprised to hear, is a notable standout because it's next to impossible to get ratification through the Senate. But it is one of the most widely adopted treaties in the history of international affairs. There's, however, an adverse history of high words giving way to low deeds, of conventions that are signed but never acted on. And what I focus on in my work, and Nature Canada as an organization invests a lot of its time and effort in, is trying to ensure that our country and countries around the world actually live up to their commitments. I'll be part of the Canadian delegation to the COP16. It's another conference of the parties to the convention in Colombia later at the end of October. And my own focus in those negotiations is going to be on creating mechanisms for independent verification of whether countries are actually meeting their strategies, and hopefully a system of peer review where countries assess one another about whether they're doing what they promised to do. That's not going to be an easy thing to achieve, and I have to say the government of Canada itself is not enthusiastic about these things. They find it easy to propound high principle. They find it much more difficult to live up to it, but clearly the second is more important than the first. In terms of what we should be doing as communities of NGOs, I'm going to offer the view that I think that one of the most important things that we can do has nothing to do with politicians, and that is that we need to remember that certainly in democratic states like Canada, politicians are not the important actors. One of my friends, who's now passed away, used to be Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bill Graham, and he often would say to me, you know, politicians don't lead anything. We hang around, we wait to see what is the biggest parade, and when we see that parade, we run in front of it and pretend we were always there. In other words, in any democratic system, it is extremely unusual for politicians to lead change. They respond to social movements. And that's the way democracy is supposed to work. We like the idea of politicians who do great things, but that's only a positive if they do great things that we agree with. For every Gandhi, there is a Stalin, and for every Nelson Mandela, there is a Pol Pot. A functional democracy is one where politicians don't try to lead. It's where they are compelled to follow where the people lead. And that's where I think our main responsibility lies as NGOs and as civil society actors, not to persuade politicians, but to motivate the population, because politicians will have to follow where the people lead. If I ask myself, in many ways, why is it that many political actors are not doing things that they themselves know are the right things to do and are in the long-term interest of our country and of our world? Indeed, measures that will decide not only whether there's a Canada, but whether there's a human race in 100 or 500 years. They are not failing to do these things because they are foolish. They are not failing to do these things because they don't understand the consequences of acting or not acting. They are not doing these things because they see no benefit to themselves in doing it, or they see active perils to themselves in antagonizing certain constituencies by acting. We have to persuade them that it is in their best interest as people who want to get re-elected to do these things. And the only way to do that is to mobilize ordinary citizens. For Nature Canada, as a naturalist organization, we are in an unusually strong position this way, because we work directly with people in local communities. And as much as I would like to say that my colleagues and I are all brilliant people, when we meet with political actors, what they really care about isn't the brilliance of our ideas. It's whether we speak for people in their ridings who are going to be voting for them at the next election. And in trying to persuade political actors, each year we bring people from across Canada to meet with their MPs here in Ottawa. And a handful of people from the ridings saying to the MP, "I need you to do this," is far more powerful than hundreds of handsomely bound reports or scientific reports. I'll conclude by saying, in all of this work, it's easy for us to become discouraged, and it's easy for us to feel that we are shouting into a vacuum. But that's not the case. The reason we are talking about these issues here isn't because powerful corporations or interests have brought climate change or species extinction to the fore. They're the ones who don't want to be talking about these things. We are talking about this in this room and in rooms like this around the world because ordinary people have insisted on it. I like to think that, in my lifetime, I previously worked in conflict resolution and in international development. In the past 70 years, the rate of literacy has more than doubled across the world. The average lifespan of the average person has gone up by 50%, and the child mortality rate has dropped by 2/3. There really has been, by those metrics, more progress in the human condition in the past 70 years than in the previous 7,000 years. We remain, as people, capable of great things. There are people who want us to believe that's not the case, but they're wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akaash. Lisa Goof from the David Suzuki Foundation. Should be on.
Okay, great, thanks. I think most of you probably know the David Suzuki Foundation, but I'll just tackle that first part of the questions that we were assigned by sharing briefly. The word briefly was underlined in the email I got. Some of the focus for the piece of the work, anyway, that I touch at the David Suzuki Foundation as National Policy Manager, our climate, in terms of our federal climate advocacy right now, we're really actually trying to stay focused, in fact, on like what I like to call the big three climate regs that this government has committed to and has yet to, are still working their way through the system. And so that's the clean electricity regulation, setting a standard, limiting emissions from fossil fuel generation of electricity, which is, going to be hugely necessary, a hugely necessary companion step, I guess, to the earlier federal coal phase-out regulations, and beyond the formal requirements of that regulation, even just like kind of setting a clear direction for the investment in the electricity sector across the country, which is very, which is distributed, of course, across under different regulatory regimes in each province and territory. So the clean electricity regulation, the emissions cap regulation, capping emissions from the fossil fuel sector, still, according to the latest published data, the one sector where emissions are still going up rather than down. And then methane, strengthening Canada's methane regulations, which is methane being, that one is like an unsung hero, but methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, more potent than carbon dioxide, and low-hanging fruit, really. Some of the cheapest and cost-effective emission reductions from the oil and gas sector are available there. And then also, continuing what has been a focus for the David Suzuki Foundation over the past decade. Some of you might have come in contact with the Blue Dot movement for seeking legal recognition of the right to a healthy environment, in partnership with CAPE, actually, and environmental defense. And then that's more recently legislative. A new federal legislation requiring the development of a strategy on environmental racism and environmental justice. And I bring that up here because we really see these legislative recognitions of imposing a human rights obligations on on the government's environmental governance, I guess, as a very important evolution, and one that one that ultimately is about solidifying climate action as a right that goes beyond political, that has the power to take climate action, or to insulate climate action, I guess, a little bit from the types of political wins that we're seeing today. We do need to understand that climate change does affect our fundamental human rights, and approach the urgency of acting on the issue with that understanding. The David Suzuki Foundation's focus is mostly domestic, local in some cases, federal for sure, and we also have a regional presence in some provinces. We do keep an eye on the international developments, like Kat was speaking to recently, and we'll have a presence at at the upcoming climate COP. We're also tracking the nature COP, and then also the forthcoming final round of negotiations towards developing a new international treaty to end plastic pollution. And that we see very much tied into the climate as a climate action agenda item too, because that's about the upstream demand for fossil fuels ultimately as well, plastic. And increasingly, we're trying to take those international, put a spotlight on those international developments in a way to really help people well, I guess maybe let me just back up and say, like, seeing again the consensus documents, for example, coming out of, or the Pact for the Future coming out of the United Nations General Assembly and Climate Week last week in New York, it really, confirming again, articulating again this global consensus that we need to end fossil fuel combustion. It really is quite. It feels like we're in some alternate reality in Canada where some of the, where we're like debating the fundamentals of carbon pricing, right? And so we are trying to really harness the power of those emerging international consensus statements, even if they are but articulation of goals, to really try to make it more clear that opponents of climate action are not just, it's not just one Canadian politician versus another Canadian politician. It's not just province versus federal leaders. Opponents of climate action are like going against a global consensus and going against an inevitable evolution in terms of in the energy sector. And I think that's something that we are trying to bring more and more into our messaging. We are also, just to quickly address some of the things we're grappling with right now, I think, is how to do this work in an era of misinformation. You might have seen the report that came out of the federal government's Foresight shop a couple months ago, identifying misinformation as one of the fundamental threats facing on the horizon. And not just the presence of misinformation, but the threat that was named was actually that people do not know how to know what is true. And I think, like, for the David Suzuki Foundation as a science-based organization, we are really trying to maintain credibility, not just for ourselves, but reinforce what credible means. And that does mean backing off an alarmist tone and really trying to have a tone that is more deliberate and remains centered. And then we are trying to, we're also preparing for an inevitable election period. Some days it feels like we're already in it. And I think, like, one of the things that folks need to recognize is that for charities during an election period, we are quite constrained in terms of how we can advocate. The David Suzuki Foundation does not register as a third-party advertiser under the Elections Act. It's it requires an amazing amount of administrative capacity to do so. But that means that there are restrictions on even how public communications about issues that are associated with one party or another. And in the current context, I actually am really worried about how that will end up being interpreted with respect to climate. Unfortunately, this is not an issue that should be inherently considered partisan, but the extent to which that issue is associated with a party at this point could well constrain the way we're able to communicate about climate action during the election period. So those are some of the things that we're doing and thinking about. I see the organizers looking at watches, so I'll try to condense the brief notes that I made here on this other easy peasy question about what do we need to do to curb the climate crisis. I can't say I've got the answer, and like it's a tough act to follow my co-panelists here. But I've got a 5-point plan. I'll offer a 5-point plan regardless. I'll hazard it. Number one, we need to recognize that we are up against powerful entrenched interests. And this isn't, I'm not saying anything that people in this room don't already know for sure, but knowing that, I think, like, it's tempting to or not tempting, it's like easy to despair that we're really losing ground, I think, in climate action right now. At a moment where the science of it the state of the environment, the state of the climate crisis demands more urgency. And I actually think that if we know that we're up against powerful interests in the fossil fuel industry, just to name them, as we've been reminded to do, I think we need to see the current pushback against climate policy actually as, in part, a reflection that those powerful interests feel threatened. You know, some of you might have seen the ads down, like all the billboards in downtown Ottawa where politicians will see them celebrating the necessity of Canadian LNG. You know, in some ways, I might be more worried if the fossil fuel industry did not need to advertise, you know, to hire PR firms. And in the same way, you know, like I'm very the attack on the politicization and attack on carbon pricing is deeply distressing. And let's remember that a decade ago, there was no carbon price to defend. So we're seeing the predictable response of vested interests to a paradigm shift that is possible, right? Maybe already underway. And so let's harness that power. Number two, we need to acknowledge and lift up positive trends, but without glossing over the scale of the problem. Angela already gave us some great examples of the positive trends, and I love the work that you're doing. You know, the climate data really underscores the urgency of it all. There are some very worrying trends. And there are some positive trends. The renewable energy is taking off, exceeding projections. Yeah. Ordinary people now talk about heat pumps. When my kids were smaller, I spent quite a bit of time in learn to ski programs and the cross-country skiing clubs, where the focus was really just trying to help very small people stay upright on skis. And the hardest part of that, even in cross-country skiing, is when there's a slope or a curve. And our advice to those kids, like what we have to get them to do, is not fixate on the thing that's about to make them fall, but focus on where they're going. That's the key to staying upright. And I think that's something we need to do in the movement too. Number three, rethink the emergency frame. We are in a climate emergency, but it's an emergency that isn't going away in the short term. And this is about our credibility as a movement, I think, as well as what it takes to sustain ourselves as humans. On the credibility side, I think people realize that, I mean, the sad fact of the matter is, no matter how successful, how many times we switch off the light switch, even if all these important regulations are finalized, we're on track to have a really bad forest fire season next year again. So it is a long-term challenge, and being honest about that, humans, like, we just can't sustain emergency mode. It's hard on our nervous systems. So how do we operate around this emergency in a way that prepares us for the marathon, that keeps us going in the marathon, and not just sprint after sprint after sprint, which feels unsustainable. Number four, be intentional about tending to social values that support the government action we need to see. It's hard for me to say as a policy wonk, and definitely my job is focused on policy. I firmly believe, and I will defend it all the time, that that's very critical work that organizations like all of ours do, and that we need to support as in civil society. But I do observe that our climate advocacy has become very fragmented and detailed, focused on the details of each of these small pieces, and our opponents have a very simple message: axe the tax. And at the same time as we've seen these attacks on key climate policies gain traction, what's even more worrying to me is we've seen a slide in public climate beliefs. So whether people even believe, the number of people who will not, say, agree on a survey about whether fossil fuels cause climate change, that number is going up. I don't know if anyone has tested the causation there, and I'm not a behavioral science expert by any means. But I came across a study once, quite some time ago, where people going into a major retail store, before plastic bags had been banned, were given buttons to wear that said, like, "Save the Earth" or something like that. And people wearing that button were more likely to say "no bag, please" when they got to the checkout counter. It was just like, and the researchers hypothesized that this like cognitive dissonance is, we naturally avoid cognitive dissonance. And so when you're wearing a "I care about the environment" button and the cashier says, "Would you like a plastic bag?" you're kind of like, no, more likely to oppose. I mean, how do we reinforce those underlying values? And I think, unfortunately, our opponents have accessed that in the other way, like by saying, like, these intensive messaging campaigns, scapegoating the carbon price for everything that is wrong in the world. I worry, this is one of the things I worry about, is that they are having the opposite effect of eroding the deep environmental values that go well beyond any one policy. So we need to reverse engineer that and make sure we're supporting, make sure that in our policy advocacy we're also tending to those underlying values. And the fifth point on my 5-point plan, will be happy to know, has already been spoken to well by everybody else, which is to connect and empower. I'll just add one little nuance. Like, yes, we do need to see ourselves as part of movements. That's critical. I also think, though, that involves a little bit reframing or expanding the way we think about success. We can't actually solve the climate crisis today, although I appreciate the efforts that the organizing committee of this event are putting into it and your presence today. But we can bring our actions into stronger alignment with our values, and we can again, like, reinforce the underlying values that we need, that will ultimately deliver those results.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And as said, last but not least, Julia Levin from Environmental Defense.
Thank you. The getting to go last, I'll try not to be too repetitive with what my colleagues have said, also because I work with many of these colleagues on the same policies. Environmental defense, we advocate for ambitious policy at the provincial and federal level to protect communities. That means getting toxics out of our supply chains. It means fighting the plastic pollution crisis. It means protecting the green belt, and it means fighting for a safe climate. My team, we work on federal climate policy. We are the fossil fuel phase-out team, and so we work on both the policy and narrative side around trying to bring about this managed decline of the oil and gas industry that Catherine was talking about earlier. And so we do that by, on the policy side, our 3 priorities. 2 of them are similar to what Lisa was mentioning. Getting that cap on emissions on the oil and gas sector, getting it done within the next, well, at least draft regulations, hopefully coming within the next month. Making Canada the first jurisdiction to cap emissions from the oil and gas sector. So there's quite an ambitious regulation that civil society was absolutely fundamental in bringing about. And as Lisa mentioned, clean electricity regulations. The third one that differs is ending the public financing of the oil and gas sector. The federal government of Canada provides massive amounts of public dollars to oil and gas companies each and every year. In 2023, Environmental Defense we do our best to tally that each year. We're the only organization who's doing that. The federal government doesn't, so it is incumbent on civil society to fill that gap. In 2023, the federal government provided $18 billion to oil and gas companies. That's just what we can track. That is an incredible amount of taxpayer dollars going to the companies feeling the climate crisis. If you look at the last 4 years, it's about $65 billion. With $65 billion, we could ensure transit systems across the country are properly funded. We could ensure that I think it's 2 million homes would be equipped with heat pumps, ensuring that people are getting those cost savings, those benefits. We could do so much with that money. The government of Canada has taken some steps because of civil society's pressure to end some of that public financing, but the lion's share is the public financing provided by Crown corporations like Export Development Canada. That was $15 billion last year, and new rules might be coming this fall. They need to be strong. At this point, weak rules would be worse than no rules, set a really dangerous global precedent. So we're working with our supporters and our allies to make sure those rules are strong. We sent Prime Minister Trudeau about 3,000 postcards over the last couple of weeks telling him that people care. We didn't. People across the country did. So that's the policy side. But on the narrative side, we are trying to take on the oil and gas industry. So this looks like, for example, we have a new campaign, about a year old, called Climate Villains, where we name and shame the 10 individuals who are most responsible for blocking climate action in Canada. For example, that's Rich Kruger, the CEO of Suncor. That's Dave McKay, the CEO of RBC, which is the bank in the world that provides the most money to the fossil fuel industry. We want to show that there's people making decisions. It isn't inevitable that things are the way they are. People are making decisions, and in that way take away some of the power from that industry and bring back power to our communities. Another big part of our narrative work is around pushing back against what we call dangerous distractions, false solutions, especially carbon capture and storage, also a bit hydrogen, fossil hydrogen. These are these new, carbon capture and storage is this idea that you can have a refinery, for example, or a power plant, and equip it with carbon technology to capture some of that carbon dioxide and store it underground. But this was never intended to be a climate solution. The oil and gas industry has been doing this for 50 years because they realized that they can't get that last, in many cases, they can't get the last 1/3 of their deposits. And they figured out carbon dioxide was actually really a way to get to recover all of that oil and gas in their deposits. And now they've tricked governments into subsidizing carbon for the express purpose of more production. So 80% of all the carbon that's ever been captured over the last 50 years, which isn't much because the technology doesn't work, but 80% of that has been used for more oil and gas production. So these are just clearly greenwashing schemes that are not meant to mitigate climate pollution. They're entirely meant to prolong business as usual and to weaken the regulations that we need, like the cap on oil and gas emissions. So our work is pushing back against those false solutions, bringing academics into the fight, and trying to really take away power from these escape hatches that the industry has. In terms of where I think civil society, all of us need to collectively go, I mean, there will be some repetition with my colleagues up here. Number one, build power. I think one thing the far right does well is build big tents where anyone fits under the tent, no matter, it doesn't actually matter. Progressive spaces have not historically been great about building and bringing people in. We've done a lot of calling out and not enough calling in. And in order to build power, we have to widen the umbrella. We have to bring more people in. We can't wait for someone to be in the perfect stage of their journey before we bring them in. We have to do a better job about making welcoming communities where people feel like they belong. Part of that is we have to do a better job. Something that we talk about in the climate space sometimes is painting the beach. So tourism, a travel company, they don't show you what it's like to get on the plane and take off your shoes and go through security. They show you the beach. They show you the place you want to be. Us as climate activists, we spend a lot of time talking about the plane and the shoes and the security detector, like all of that, and not enough time actually talking about what the beach looks like and what the benefits, what the tangible benefits of that beach are in terms of air quality, in terms of affordability. We have to be connecting to affordability. We have to be telling people that there are cost savings benefits that will save families money each and every month with these climate solutions. And there's a lot more work to be done there. Similarly, we have to do a better job as civil societies with members of engaging our members, because yes, I agree we have to get to the persuadables, but the best people to do that are activated bases that we can engage to have conversations themselves, to do deep canvassing, deep conversations, door to door. We need to equip everyone in our community to be able to have those conversations and build those conversations, because everyone said it right now, but misinformation is one of the biggest obstacles to the work. I saw some federal government polling that shows that a quarter of Canadians now believe that climate change is a hoax, and that number keeps increasing. And the only way we're going to tackle that is through having one-on-one conversations with people. And the third thing we have to do, the third and final, is we have to hold power accountable, public and private power. That means at every single level. And actually, we've had some great news this week about holding oil and gas power accountable for coming out of Toronto. So Toronto City Council passed a motion to ban fossil fuel advertising on the TTC, and the City Council is exploring, has been mandated to develop a plan to ban fossil fuel advertising in city assets as well. City of Ottawa was exploring something a little more tentatively, but on the same. There's so many ways that we could be holding power accountable at every single level. And in the face of potentially, we don't know the outcome of the federal election. There's still time, but there are so many levels of government and so many places of power that we can still exert influence and pressure. And so we have to be strategic and smart about what those are. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to all of you. Great energy, rich array of ideas, and I think we all deserve to give them another good round of applause for this presentation. Well, thank you, friends. Now you've re-energized. We'll look forward to your creative and dynamic ideas for what else we can do to fight climate change. Just a logistics matter, if some of you could squeeze your way from the back of the room and populate some of the front tables, you're welcome to do so. There's nothing prohibitive or against the rules of doing that. In fact, it would be easier for conversation, perhaps. So there are a few chairs up here, but bring a chair with you if you can. You don't otherwise find one. Fine, thank you. Now, bit of an experiment. We're doing sort of this open mic season. Think of yourself in a pub. You've got a song that you want to sing, and you just got to get it out. So now's the time to sing for the climate, songs for the climate. Ideas, suggestions. If you have questions of any of the panelists, those are fair game too. But we want to concentrate on, as much as possible, on your ideas for action. In response to what's been said throughout the conference, particularly what the panelists have said this afternoon, and beyond that, if you have fresh ideas to bring forward or comments to make. So I'll do my best to try to recognize you from here, and we have two mics, Gord and Ruby, who will pass those around. So it looks like Susan's just grabbed the mic here, so I'll let her speak first.
Well, I enjoyed those so much. They're all groups that I support and think they did a fabulous, fabulous job. And I'm very interested in trying to put together a couple of these ideas. And I love the wrap yourself in the flag thing. Because that is one way of getting to the average Canadian. However, the flag I would wrap myself in would have to do with Nature Canada if I'm trying to reach the average Canadian. So I would really like to hear other people's ideas about how we do reach the average Canadian and how we can do it quickly. Thanks.
Yeah. Senator Andrew.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Cardozo, and I'm a senator from Ontario, but my real claim to fame is I am Roy Culpepper's cousin. Way to go, Roy.
I'm glad Roy finally has some fame to be accredited.
Oh, there's a lot to go around, believe me. So I just want to share a few thoughts as I have listened to this fascinating day. Just if I can start with Susan's point about reaching the average person, and I think, Angela, you talked about we're on the cusp of a change of government. I wouldn't give up on that just yet. And I think part of it is, maybe nobody in this room will like this, but Poilievre is a brilliant communicator. You might hate everything he says, but he's a brilliant communicator. He's fast off the mark, and people remember what he stands for. He stands for axe the tax, build the homes, stop the crime. Why can't we use the same language? We've had save the planet for a long time, but why don't we have cut the floods, end the forest fires, end the hurricanes? There's a huge hurricane going through the U.S. right now. People are dying left, right, and center, and nobody's making the connection between that and fossil fuels. Some of these things have happened in Alberta with floods and forest fires, and you're not allowed to make the connection between those events and forest fires and fossil fuels, but I think one needs to do that. So I think we don't have to speak in, with all due respect, Roy, PhD theses. We can speak in bumper stickers, just like the people who are winning the debates. The second point I'd like to suggest in terms of building the big tents is to make the movement more accessible. I think, and I've seen this I've been part of other movements, I've worked in places where there's a whole set of acronyms and a lexicon which other people don't understand. So there's and in each movement, when people try to come in and they don't know your acronyms, you kind of will look down their nose. What, you don't know what that means? Or you don't get that? Like, forget about you, I'm going to talk to her. So, I mean, I think, I literally think we have to go back and talk about what's wrong with carbon. Like, carbon dioxide is what we all want and need. What's wrong with that? So I think we've lost the narrative with a number of people because we've gone so far down the road and we assume everybody understands it, but they weren't part of the debate for the last 20 years. They're just sort of chiming in now. So I think we have to be make it more accessible. One of the speakers talked about the right have a big tent. Well, part of that big tent is they're not so demanding of people in terms of being purists about what they stand for. They don't have to know all the acronyms, but they can just join them. So I think that's one of the ways. Lastly, I just wanted, this is a totally biased point, is to encourage you to look at the Senate. So the House of Commons is, as a venue for lobbying and engaging. The House of Commons, as you know, they change every 2 to 4 years. It's a very political and now a very toxic place, so it's really hard to engage people a lot. In the Senate, you've got a very different atmosphere. So right now, of the 100 or so senators, 85 of us are independents. We're not tied to any party, so no party tells us how to vote. We don't caucus with any party. We don't engage in fundraising with any party. Nobody punishes me if I say the wrong thing. Nobody prevents me from getting up and saying anything, which is all the things that happen in the House of Commons. Everybody's controlled very much by their parties. Many of you will know Senator Rosa Galvez. She's an absolute powerhouse. But there's another group of senators I want to highlight, and that's the Senators for Climate Solutions. It's quite a loose network of senators. Mary Coyle is one of the key people there. She's one of the co-chairs. So I encourage you to be in touch with her. So the thing about the Senate in terms of this issue, one is it's a more sane place. And that's not to denigrate the others, but literally, I talk to people who appear before us and appear before the House, and they just say it's so much better because they get questions about the issues. For those of you who've been to the House recently, you would never say to an MP, that's a good question, because the other people will hate you. So every question you asked in the House of Commons is somebody's trying to trap you and turn you against the other, or you're just in the crosshairs. When you come to a Senate committee, you're just being asked the questions. But here's the other thing is, we're there for the long term. Okay, we're appointed to till age 75. After the election, we're all going to be there. So you're making long-term investments if you invest in relationships with senators, because they're going to be there for several years. And you don't know who's going to COP in November, because there could be an election before from the House of Commons, but the folks you talk to at the Senate, they're going to be going to COPs for quite a few years to come. And the other thing we do quite successfully is to raise issues and sometimes do studies. So a lot of the things that you want to get done can be done by senators, by groups of senators. And sometimes it can be a committee, but sometimes I'm involved in, just as an aside, working with 3 other senators. We're putting together a report on the disability benefit that we're really frustrated with the government on. It's just 4 of us have gotten together, and we're pulling a report together, and it'll get some profile because 4 senators have put it forward. So there are groups of senators who do that kind of stuff. You don't have to work through committees. So I just encourage you to look at the senators, find some friends there. They'll be friends for long term, and they can raise issues. We don't have the ability to make decisions like the minister does, but we have the ability to raise issues and put together very substantial reports. We have access to the Library of Parliament, which is one of the best research operations in the country. And so there's a whole gem out there which I'd really encourage you to participate with and interact with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something, if you don't mind. I've been in and out, sorry, just trying to deal with organizational issues, but I do have 4 children. 2 are at university now and 2 are still in school. And one of the shocking things for me, my eldest is 20. When he was going through the educational system here in Ottawa, he's in a French school, French Catholic board. What was really interesting was that they were learning about recycling, they were learning about the environment, they were learning about climate change, and then all of a sudden things started to shift. When they got to high school, their teachers started putting some of this into question. So how much they learned about climate change depended on the teacher and whether that teacher believed in climate change or not. Although they had to talk about it in the curriculum, the emphasis that was placed on it depended on the teacher, and the way that it was explained and the science behind it depended very much on the teacher. And so the ultimate result that we have is, even though they are in an eco school, so certified eco, the school is eco, they're supposed to be recycling, they're supposed to be minimizing the garbage and the plastics and so forth, and they're supposed to take courses, and in the courses they talk about climate change. The messages that they come out with are not necessarily ones that are accurate, and they're not necessarily ones that sort of are resonating with them, because they're asking them to question these things. So one of the things that I think might be helpful is not to assume that all the young people, because of the sharing of the posts on Instagram or whatever, are climate actors or fighting against climate change, because sometimes they share without understanding the totality of it, and they think their work is done just by sharing it. And 2, I really think there's a lot of work to be done with teachers. Not like, yes, university professors, I'm one, I can tell you hands down, absolutely, 100%, but teachers. Because I think maybe we should be working with boards, not only about whether their schools produce a lot of garbage or not, whether they recycle or don't recycle, but I really do think that part of the messaging and part of us taking it seriously and part of how people understand what is happening and linking it, the easier way to understand the message, right? This generation was not involved in any of this, and suddenly they have to do this and to understand why and what's the reason behind it and what's happening. I think that who plays a really important role are the teachers. So if there's any way we could reach the different boards, educational boards, and work with not only the educational board themselves, but actually the teachers who are in class. I know of a teacher who basically said to his students, I have to teach you this, but I don't believe in it. So here, this is the information, do whatever you want with it. Right? So he did follow the curriculum, but he undermined it completely by the way he presented it. So there has to be a different way to kind of send these messages to our kids, especially because social media plays a significant role as well, and there's a lot of denying, and there's a lot of greenwashing, and there are a lot of issues that are confusing on social media. So they need that base, and they're not getting that base, at least from my experience. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ruby. Good. Friends, other comments, suggestions? Please. Yes. Oh, that's... is that Emma?
Hi, my name's Leah. I'm going to hate
Leah,
hearing myself in the mic. I was just thinking about that in terms of like what we can do as families, because I feel like a lot of what we internalize comes from like where we're raised. And so like, yes, with teachers, I like 100% agree. This might be like a really silly idea. I was just thinking about when we get to the holiday season and suddenly you just like want to go to the mall and like buy everything for everybody that you know, and then after the holiday season you feel a bit empty because your wallet is empty. But then you realize like the insignificance of a lot of the things that you've just bought for like other people, things that you've gifted. So like I'm just thinking if we can also like shift the way that we see like gift giving seasons, because it is really relevant. Like Christmas is a very relevant thing still. Even though traditions are changing, I still feel like it is very like capitalist. It's, you know, a lot of people benefit from like the Christmas season. So I'm just thinking if we can like shift ways that we view gift giving seasons. And I know that like with my family, we've kind of stopped doing gifts like years ago. We kind of just do more charity things or give each other things that would actually benefit you. My aunt a few years ago, our gift was a sponsor child. So every year, instead of getting like our family members' gifts, we then put some of that money, because you know, you kind of budget for Christmas. We put that budget towards something else. So yeah, I'm just wondering if we can like shift that but towards doing even like more sustainable, reusable gifts, but shifting away from like companies that create those products just so that we can say we're green. I mean, like actually doing sustainable gift giving. So that was just my random thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Think of the fossil fuel content in the production and manufacturing and distribution of the gifts we give, and maybe adjust the list of our gifts accordingly. So, a good idea. Thank you. Erwin.
So it's been an amazing conference. I've been totally incapable of absorbing everything that has been said. And maybe I missed something. But Adrian asked a question about the abyss. And it's my understanding that 2050, it may be actually quite difficult for our children and grandchildren to have any reasonable life on this planet. I don't know whether that's alarmist, but I think one of the things that needs to be done is to clarify not just the short term, you know, there may be another flood or there may be another wildfire, but when you talk all the time about 1.5, about 2, I'm a statistician, but I can't take that in. I need to know what that really means for our children and grandchildren. And I think one of the ways of doing that is, yes, a Senate committee. We don't have a Surgeon General here who told us that tobacco was bad for us and managed to defeat the tobacco barons. So I think the Senate option is a good one, because I think generally people will believe that it's not a group of progressives, that it's a group of whatever older people, some of whom had very distinguished careers. So I think that to have a Senate committee that would look at what the real consequences are of this problem and give us, and they can't do it by tomorrow, but they can do it over time, whatever happens in the federal or provincial elections. I would like to see the insurance issue followed up very seriously. We are already facing insurance premiums, and it just hasn't started in terms of short-term consequences of floods. I was blown by the youth case. He talked about 20,000 pages. That's 100 books. I'm sorry, neither Roy nor I or Ruby, who have PhDs, we can't absorb 100 books. So we have to make this something that people can actually understand. And he told me, I'm sorry, I'm not good on names, but you told me that there was on the Eco-Justice site, there was a thing on the background. I'm going to look at it, but I think we need to have that background. It may be easy to understand, I don't know, but we need to have that turned into an op-ed or a YouTube, or probably, my son will tell me, on Instagram or TikTok, or I don't know. Polyev is a great communicator, but he has access to incredible social media, and it's not that difficult. It doesn't cost that amount of money. And when I listen to Angela, we have all these incredible solutions and everything, but I think we have to put the solutions together with what the problem is, and find a way of having an indicator about that problem that we can come back to, that is not just the 1.5 or 2. So there you go.
Thank you, Aaron. Communication and communicating with the wider public is certainly a thread that's running through this discussion and earlier in the conference as well. Yes, who's got the mic? Please.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Emma. Lovely to meet everyone. On the topic of the abyss, and it's come up a few times, I believe, especially in the latter few talks from today, when we wonder why there's a sudden radicalization in any direction, but always kind of converging around increased, not just climate denial, but science denial in general. I think there is an incredible opportunity for environmentalists and climate change-minded groups to be leadership. I don't have a PhD, but I do have some academic background in dealing with ecofascism and the relevant rise in Europe. And one of the main things that's come out of research on that is that it's fear that's motivating people. There's anxieties underlying all parts of life. And as we know, the world's one very large Gordian knot, so they all tie back together at some point. And anything related to climate change and the environment is one of those core nexuses. So there's an opportunity for environmentalists to really guide people away from the fear that demands simplicity and allow them to embrace the chaos, embrace the complexity in ways that provides them with tools. It's connecting environmentalism to local food banks and food security programs. It's connecting them to better funding via government policies. And I think that's perhaps a focus that will help us make those connections to individuals that are not necessarily in the same mental space that we are in this room. And if anybody has any thoughts about how they might like to mobilize something like that in their community, in their lives, I would love to hear it, because it's definitely something I've wrangled with over the years.
Thank you very much. Good.
Megan?
Hi, my name is Morgan Hayes, and just as a little bit of an introduction, I'm from the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs. My educational background is in international relations. And on behalf of the other NIPSIA students here, and we also have a student from University of Ottawa, we're all master's students. When we talk about ways, tangible ways to mobilize civil society, I think a tool and an asset that could really be used is students. We're at a point in our lives where we're just starting our careers, and for us as master's students, we have enough years of education where we can really be a great asset. And as you all have had long careers and have a lot of networks as well, definitely reaching out to students and making use of our knowledge and our passion for climate change is really important. And if you're interested in pension funds and its connection with fossil fuels, I have a published research paper about that. I digged through 11 years of financial reports for British Petroleum and how Canadian pension funds are connected to that. So there is a lot of research coexisting on that topic. And yeah, so for civil society, I think definitely looking in your neighborhoods and knowing that there's institutions and students that are wanting opportunities to get involved is really important.
Excellent, Morgan. I would invite you to share that paper with us. We'd be happy to circulate it, so give it wider readership. So sounds like a very good piece. Thank you very much. Please, at the back.
Yes, I'm unofficially official Grandmothers Advocacy Network person, and I'm not a communications person, but in our last campaign, the one we're doing now on global hunger, especially focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, one of the things we found out early on was how much we didn't know about global hunger, food systems, and all that stuff. And one of our members brilliantly suggested we do something called small sips, where people took a specific topic and in a couple of pages would research it and describe it. And people got these things every couple of weeks, and they built up. We did, in the end, over 20 of these, but they were on everything from food sovereignty movements to what is the Canadian government doing, what is happening internationally, what is, well, there are a number of issues. But it was a really effective communication mechanism, and we all, different ones of us, took it on. It's not an easy task, but we could do it as volunteers, and this other person was able to polish it, put it together, put it up on a website. Everybody could read them. And of all the things in the campaign that people appreciated, that was it. So it was kind of taking, someone else talked about short, simple messages. This was a way to break down a complicated subject into biteable chunks that we could all understand. So that's a suggestion.
Thank you. Further suggestions, ideas, comments, questions? A couple more here.
Hi. I really despise this the tax rhetoric, and I think it would be useful to come up with a punchy line to respond to this and throw it back in the person's face. Unfortunately, the only line I've come up with, well, it's 2 lines, starts out slightly vulgar. It's like, cut the crap, what's your plan?
So mine's not going to be as clever and catchy as that one, Ida, but going to some of the math, like bringing the knowledge of the past 2 days together, the math to me just is so shocking. I was talking to Reed earlier about insurance companies, and like the recent floods in Toronto cost the city $4 billion. And it just amazes me that taxpayers are paying the insurance for the national disasters, and taxpayers are paying to subsidize creating the natural disasters. And so when I put the math together, it's like, so we're spending billions of dollars, Kat shared whatever it is, $16 billion to create the flooding, and then we're going to then pay more taxes to, like, it just, like, I'm like, how do we not do that math? Angela and I were talking about earlier, like, we need some more proposals with some simple math that people understand. And to me, that is like really simple math.
One thing that people do not understand with flooding is that when the water comes up above the door jamb on your car, you can write your car off. We saw so many pictures of flooded out cars on the Don Valley Parkway in Toronto, and nobody understood that those are just now hulking relics. In Quebec, they actually have a thing for registering vehicles, and they say, make sure that you don't have a flooded car because that car is no longer viable. It may be something like, say goodbye to your car, kiss it goodbye when you get a flood. I don't know. Most people can relate to at least that. Okay, so that's just one issue. The other issue I want to raise is that there's a new pipeline and LNG terminal being considered, the Prince Rupert gas transmission line. And if we all think about the TMX pipeline and the Coastal GasLink pipelines, there was a heck of a lot of effort put in to opposing those. And I would like to see if we can get some sort of consortium going to really push in the next 2 months to dissuade the British Columbian Energy Resources Department to stop ignoring their own regulations and just cut that project. This to me is we're on the cusp of watching another pipeline being built and another LNG project terminal that will be a floating one on an island with floating storage tanks. I mean, you look at it and you think, what could go wrong? I don't know. So that's just my pitch for something else that's new and exciting to worry about.
Thank you. George?
No, I was just on X here, and Mr. Polyev is saying Trudeau and Singh's job-killing tax hike will unleash a nuclear winter on Canada's economy, costing us 414,000 jobs and 90 billion. And I've got a draft reply that says, your lack of climate change consciousness and policy, including on fossil fuel emission reductions, will contribute to real climate nuclear winter of flood, fire, overheating, economic collapse. So get with some climate program, and I've used the word stop the slogans rather than cut the crap. So you can go on X and use your own.
Have you pushed send, George? Good for you. Climate action.
Hi there.
While we speak.
My name's Amanda Rosenstock. I'm based here in Ottawa. I know that we're here focused mainly on, civil society actions in terms of advancing progress on climate. But, we've heard a lot of people mention different political figures, and I think even though there is a lot of progress being made in civil society, we cannot escape the political sphere. That is where decisions are ultimately made. And as somebody who has been involved in politics for some time, it is it remains my firm belief that unless we really want meaningful change, we have to change the people who are responsible for delivering that change. I mean, so I'm not going to try and get too partisan here, but I think one of, we can criticize the Conservatives all we want, but at the end of the day, I mean, they are really focused on, their messaging is focused on what they're going to deliver for Canadians. I haven't seen others in the political sphere do that nearly as well. I mean, can't say that they haven't been trying, but when we take carbon pricing, for example, where are the alternatives that are going to be readily available to people that are tangibly available, where people can really see, they can see a path to viability, right? I mean, where has the government been on rolling out charging infrastructure at the scale and the pace that we need to actually get people to transition off of ICE vehicles? Where are the necessary investments in public transit, not just in capital funding, but on the operational side? This new permanent public transit fund that's going to come in 2026, it's not going to do anything for Ottawa. Ottawa needs operational funding. Many Canadian municipalities need operational funding. So, when the election time comes, we absolutely need to make sure that we are out there, we are galvanizing people within our different organizations, and our movement collectively, to throw our weight behind candidates who are running for those parties that are putting forward a progressive platform, a progressive vision, and are committed to making the investments necessary for this transition. So I'll just leave it there.
Good, thank you. Just a quick note to be clear. You're right. This conference is concentrating, or has concentrated on getting at civil society, mobilizing civil society, but to an end. And I think that the end is clear. We need to bring pressure to bear on the power centers, which are governmental, state-centered, and market-centered corporations. Those are the two ultimate targets in terms of reducing and ultimately eliminating fossil fuels for energy in particular. So it's a question of how we get there, and that's why we were looking at this particular theme of what do we need to do to advance the cause. Please, over here, Raymond.
So I've been doing lots of thinking about if Poilievre was to win power, and what would be the things, the measures that they would want to implement that would actually work towards a greener economy, right? So, and I've found only one example, unfortunately. I'm looking for more. So if you remove the carbon tax, right, that reduces the price of fossil fuels and makes it more competitive compared to electrical solutions or electric-based solutions, right? Well, there happens to be a tax, a provincial and a federal tax, and my understanding is Doug Ford and Poilievre don't like taxes. So why are we taxing electricity, right? So maybe we should look at solutions like that they would be willing to entertain, right? I really think that if Poilievre comes in power, our possibilities will shrink quite a bit, right? But there are still potentially some things we could do that would match their narrative, right? So one thing I'm proposing is we should talk about getting rid of sales tax on electricity.
Okay, thank you. Sylvie?
Okay, I have a very unfair question. So I made the presentation this morning on the Mine Ban Treaty because I was trying to see what worked to cascade the treaty. And I'm still with the fossil fuel NPT because I think this marvelous work, we got 14 nations. Now, if we put them all together, I don't know if we have the size of Ontario, but there's 14 nations that endorsed it, some 200 and 300,000 people that have endorsed it, and we see the work, back up, like we want to support this. So this is my unfair question. Like, I've heard marvelous things done by many NGOs, and I've done work with NGOs for some 40 years now. But, you know, what I've learned with the Mind Band Treaty is that once we got the right narrative, you know, that we did not need the anti-personal mind, that weapon, you know, was not required to do what military people need to do. Once that narrative was confirmed, once we had our, you know, I call him an exemplar, but when we had the political leader standing up and saying, let's go, what happened is that many Canadian NGOs stopped their, like, campaign for, you know, doing this and that and this and that, and they rally around the Mind Action Canada and said, stop the anti-personal mind. We're helping this treaty to move forward. So I don't know when that time will happen. I'm thinking it will happen, but I'm going to be spending some brain power here thinking about how we can move that treaty, because I think that is a big key. How many NGOs would be willing to adapt, change, be flexible on their agenda so that they come up and say, my number one objective for this year is to do what we can to support the fossil fuel NPT. So it's unfair, but I had to put it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie.
We also...
Not sure it's so unfair as a legitimate challenge. You know, this is about collaboration, not just in Canada, but globally. And how much are we up for that? And maybe put aside some of the other key things that we're all working on to advance a single cause that can make a major contribution in the long run. Ruby.
We have 2 comments online, so...
please, and that maybe that we we may have to wrap up after that. So,
okay.
Please,
so
go
one of the comments I think maybe potentially was linked to what was said earlier about the tax and removal of the tax and income of people and the alternatives. Jen notes, on the topics of doing the math and bumper sticker slogans, when people say we can't afford climate mitigation adaptation measures, just say, you know what's more expensive than, fill in the climate solution, and answer with climate change. So maybe that's sort of one of the things that potentially is an answer for people who say, I need a job now, or I want to be able to survive. You guys are making it more expensive now for me. So finding that sort of bridge, I guess. The other comment, by partnering with Indigenous communities focusing on social justice and reconciliation, we can support Indigenous sovereignty and ensuring that their rights are protected. I'm thinking of eco-justice style, especially for communities that never ceded the land.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for everybody who's still online and participating in the conference. We tend to sometimes forget you're out there, but you're part of the conversation as well. So thank you to all of those people. Any last comment? Otherwise, we'll. One more. Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Just a minute, Mike, please. Necessary for the recording. By the way, sorry to hold up, but the recordings from all of our sessions will be posted on the Crew 78 website, so you can relive this many times over. But also reference it to your own network. So, you know, some of the rich presentations we've had from some really experienced people over the course of the last couple of days, it's not a one-time thing. Those will be on our site for posterity. So please refer your friends, colleagues, networks to them. Please.
Thanks. As we know, with the first past the post system that we endure here, the Conservatives could probably win a majority with about 38% of the vote, meaning that almost two-thirds of people will have more progressive ideas than the Conservatives. And I just wanted to give a shout out to a group called Cooperate for Canada, which is formed to try and do not quite strategic voting, but emphasizing specific candidates and specific ridings where a Conservative will win by the vote being split by the other 2 or 3 or 4 parties. And I'd highly recommend you just go and just inform yourself about it.
Thank you. I don't see any more.
Hi, my name's Linda Matsumoto, and I don't have any credentials, except that I was an artist from a very early age, and my main purpose was to work for world peace. So I met my husband later in life, and he was a survivor of the atomic bomb. And this is where I connected my world peace action, was because of a human being that I met and eventually married. Was an innocent baby in the center of the atomic bomb. So I ended up working for many companies, including Atomic Energy, of all people, and learned more about war and peace. And one thing that came through to me was that we're all human beings across the world, and what unites us is our humanity. So that's what I wanted to say as my part of the short conference that I managed to attend, was that it's all connected to war, and nuclear energy and nuclear bombs is the end of the world itself. And climate change is part of that. So when we have common sense and use our wisdom, we definitely can make a great change in each human being when they realize that in themselves. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Well, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to circle back for a moment to the comment about involving students, because a project I was on the edge of many years ago, somewhat involved. A gentleman did a project in Uganda and involved Carleton University, some students from NIPSIA actually, and that ended up, the project was to do with disability, and I think the saying for them was disabled is not enabled, or something like that. Anyway, the project then morphed into producing bicycles in Uganda, and wheelchairs, and involved the engineering students from Carleton University. And I think there was another program involved as well. I only say that to sort of support that. Just it's sometimes unimaginable what can emerge from involving students. So thank you for that suggestion.
Good. Thank you very much, Gordon. Good. Well, friends, it's been a long day, I think a very involved and intensive day, and I think very dynamic from my limited perspective. But we are about to wind up the conference, and I'd like to invite my colleague Ted Jackson, who has been assigned by our executive as the chief rapporteur for the conference. So he will be anchoring the process that will produce a policy-oriented document. By policy, we mean containing key messages and recommendations that we want to share widely with the power centers, government, but widely throughout civil society as well. So we hope these messages can be picked up by other groups. And he's accompanied by our army of rapporteurs, for whom I would like personally to thank once again for their participation and involvement, and because I won't get a chance again. So I'll turn it over to Ted, and when he and his gang have finished with us, Roy will then make the benediction on the conference. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ted Jackson.
Hi. So, yes, there's a posse here. And I just want to say a few general things and then give them the floor, because they will be living with the effects of decisions that are made now and indeed have been made. So these are very smart people. There's a certain gender trend here, you might notice. But it all makes sense. And you've heard from some of them already in the general question. So anyway, we have had an incredible day and a half. On the G78 side, it's going to be my responsibility to pull a lot of this together. And we've been furiously making notes, and the team here has been making notes, I believe. I mean, they tell me. And I expect that they'll be very useful and very insightful, in fact. So we'll be working on that, and we'll get that out after some deliberation of the board of G78. But we know that there are sites of action that we've talked about over the last day and a half. Citizen action is the umbrella, but and we've heard from such talented people who are yawning slightly, but that's okay. So will we at some point. And that we have incredible talent among civil society organizations here in the room and in others that you work with, and talking about how to reshape the narrative, learning from our opponents, and trying to use some of those methods. I think that was very well articulated this afternoon, and there's a lot to do. One of the ideas that almost came up, I think it was one of our colleagues here was talking about, should there be another large gathering of citizens organizations in Canada to really reset and push these great ideas that you're incubating and you're already doing in many cases, like a citizens assembly of some kind. So we're going to think about that. Obviously, you will be the key players, and there will be a need for money, yes. And I've sketched out a budget. Seriously. So this is, if that's important, I mean, I think we don't have this government for very long. I think they want to do things before they leave. And we have in the room, we have many of the key players that could be taking part of this. We've heard a lot about what seniors can do, repurposing Seniors Day for climate action. That's a very cool idea. Tell your grandparents. We've heard all kinds of other good things around actions that are global and also national and local, like the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And we've all been educated, and I agree with you, Sylvie, that this is a really crucial piece to organize around. And we'll be supporting that through the G78, but a bigger collective action on that makes a lot of sense. Litigation, we learned a lot about it today, and supporting it. We won't be taking cases, although some of you may end up taking cases to court, but to learn about it, to understand it, to amplify it, and to use it as an educative tool along with all the other tools. And I think it was Reed who said, legal action and court cases are one of the tools in the toolkit. And there are many others that can be used on finance and on regulation and many other areas. So we've just got a rich array of ideas that have been proposed, inspiring people that have talked to us about all this, how we deal with the media. Adrian Harewood was giving us advice about building relationships with the people who produce media products and shows and stories. Pushing forward green technology. We've heard that of serious solutions on the technical side, which is happening in renewables, but needs to happen elsewhere, in buses and all kinds of other things that need to happen. Working with government in various ways. We have an ally in the Senate. I think we have actually many allies in the Senate if we go there and talk to them. Proportional representation and political reform. Lots of good ideas on the table now. People are very interested in those issues. Using financial regulation, dealing not only with the insurance issue, but also dealing with finance, incentivizing climate finance in a serious way, and opposing the banks and the pension funds for investing more in fossil fuels, taking them to task, maybe boycotting them, and saying bye-bye to banks that don't behave. Anyway, you know, you have your own list of things. We were talking about education in the last hour. We're talking about families and changes. One of the things that came up in the early sessions yesterday was around expectations around how we live. You know, why do we try to mow our lawn? Why do we expect, you know, big houses and big consumption? So we do have to change that. I think our generation has not been so good on that, but we'll get there, I hope. Anyway, we have a rich raw material here to process, to synthesize, and we have some great participants and allies and inspiring people to lead us. So we'll be working on that. But I want to turn over to my colleagues, and I've asked them, and I guess, do we have another mic?
Yeah, right here.
Okay.
So who gets it? First person?
Yeah, let's start over there.
Okay.
But I've asked them two questions. What is the biggest, or one of the key takeaways that you have from this meeting? And two, do you have any actions that you're going to take, either as an individual or with your organization, in your studies, in your career path, that that you're thinking about that is inspired by this event? So, please.
Hello.
And your name too, that would be
My
nice.
name is Michelle, and I'm also a NIPSIA student. So I kind of thought of the question kind of together. So I didn't realize that we had so much power in making change before this conference. I didn't realize we could actually sue the government. So that was really interesting. I don't know if I'll sue the government anytime soon, but also learning about how we're framing fossil fuels as weapons of mass destruction. So I'm currently in a class on non-proliferation, and we're talking about nuclear weapons, even biological weapons. So my first step in doing like local actions is to bring it up to my professor to discuss fossil fuels as well.
Thanks.
Oh, I guess we're doing this in order. Okay. Hello, I'm Emma. I similarly took the approach of kind of combining the two questions into a singular unit in my mind, and there were kind of two key and quick points that really popped up to me. First, in dealing with what sometimes feels like the overwhelming odds of organizing against such large financial interests, I think one of the greatest tools of power that they have against us is this sense of manufactured complacency. It's the idea that either it's not urgent now or it never will be, or even if it is urgent, something is more urgent. And that's come up around a lot of topics today, I think the most prominent of which was, particularly in relation to axe attacks, the cost of living crisis. And one of the most effective ways of dealing with that from what popped up over the last 2 days of conference is community and all the power that is necessary to mobilize that comes with that comes from communication. And one thing that we as students are particularly well positioned to do, and we have discussed actually, finding a way to get NIPSIA more broadly involved and a little bit more honed in on this subject in the near to mid-future, is finding ways to break down kind of the ivory tower of academia around the idea of environmental and climate change studies, and finding a way to make the reality that climate change and environmental issues are built into every single aspect of our everyday lives. I mean, when people think about climate and the environment, we want it to be one of those inescapable common experiences. It's death, taxes, and environment. And that's something we are well poised to do just by the very nature of interdisciplinary campuses. And I think that's something a number of us will be hoping to contribute to moving forwards, in large part thanks to this conference. So thank you for allowing us to participate.
Great.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, hi, my name is Tiara. I'm also with NIPSIA, a master's student, first year. I think there's been a lot of really good, impactful discussions over the last couple days, but one that there's been a little bit of emphasis on that I particularly agree with is just the importance of having conversations with people who don't agree with you and who have very different kind of ideological standpoints. Yeah, I think we can all be victims of our own echo chambers, and it's important to get involved with people who don't necessarily agree with you or have the same kind of educational background as you. Yeah, so I guess that's sort of my answer to both the questions as well, is I want to do that in my own life, and I think that's something we should all just keep in mind, that division is kind of the antithesis of cooperation, and cooperation is pretty necessary for a global issue like climate change. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Savannah. I've really enjoyed getting to listen in on these sessions the past 2 days. I've learned a lot. I think my colleagues have kind of pointed out a lot of the main things, a lot of things I didn't know that about the Non-Proliferation Treaty and all that stuff. But the thing that really stuck out to me yesterday that I wanted to hold on to was a conversation between Vanessa and Rolly, where Adrian kind of asked whether focusing on the stark vision of the world is the way that we should go, or whether we should hold on to that hope. And for me personally, I find focusing on that stark vision is really immobilizing. So I really appreciated, while we talked about the reality of everything the past 2 days, pointing to those very tangible things that our actions kind of have made, so we can see the effect that they have, and then also having those hard conversations with not just people that are in the same program as me and we all think alike, but family members and people that you wouldn't usually talk about. So yeah, really appreciated this opportunity.
Right. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Hayes, and I'm in my first year at NIPSIA as well. And a key takeaway that I've had the past 2 days is that there's so many incredible ideas and action items that we can follow through with regarding climate change. But something tangible that we should do is, regardless of who is in power politically, is we need long-term plans, and we need a formula for how we can enact change. And, it's a great privilege for us as students through our educational institution to have been invited here and to have the time to be here as well. But there's a lot of people who can't afford to be here for whichever reasons. So ensuring that all Canadians, regardless of socioeconomic class, background, anything like that, also have access to the resources that we fortunately do have access to, and the networks that we have access to. So advertising your causes, expanding this information beyond your network, that's something that could be really good recommendation for going forward, and something that I personally will be doing in my career. I worked at Infrastructure Canada for 2 summers, and I worked with natural infrastructure projects. And something that I'll be doing forward is making sure that my career is focused towards green infrastructure and towards climate change resiliency as well.
Hello, my name is Leah. This is going to be like bullet points because I've kind of blanked. Like, I have so many things to say, and I'm not going to end up saying like any of them coherently. The first thing is that like my biggest fear in life is to like just not care. Like I honestly don't understand how there's people, and I mean very specific people in like the industry, who can just like wake up and go to sleep at night and just like not care. So I feel like that is a big thing that we need to hold on to, is just care and compassion for others, and not even just other humans, just everyone around us, everything around us. Oh boy, I have so many thoughts, sorry. I think one of the frustrating things is how I'm just gonna say like the other side, the bad guys, how they benefit off of our fragmentation. For my internship I did a few years ago, I was researching for this sociologist in Portugal, and then his colleague who lives in England. So it was I was kind of looking at it from like a global perspective, but we're looking about how social movements tend to divide within themselves, and how that is what slows progress down. It's not necessarily the opposition. A lot of the times it's like internal fragmentation. and just an inability to agree on your own priorities and your own goals. So I think what I was thinking a lot about with, like coalitions and joining youth groups with seniors groups, for example, because I think that is like an incredible tool that we could do because we are coming from very different places, but we seem to still have pretty similar goals. I think just like accepting that disagreements are going to happen and that we're not all going to have the same like ways of getting to those goals, but I think that every step still is a positive step in the right direction, even if the different organizations might disagree. I think the overall goal of reducing fossil fuel emissions is still there. But yeah, I think it's just like really frustrating to try and work together. And I think the fact that we're all here and still willing to do that, for some of you who have been doing this for decades, genuinely gives me so much hope for myself for the future that I can continue doing that because, like I'm 23 and I've only been like really caring about social justice for the last 6 years maybe, and I'm exhausted. And I know that this has had a toll on my mental health and my physical health because, it's all connected. So I'm just like I'm just genuinely so grateful for you that have shown up after just decades of like this just exhausting work. Thank you for being here because this is really inspiring for myself. And I'm sorry I'm taking so long to talk. One thing I want to do is, with my degree, because I don't know what I want to do with an international affairs degree, but I know what I don't want to do. But like I've also kind of like always pictured myself as kind of what Adrian was saying yesterday with the media is like if you want to see that change in the media, then go in the media. And I feel like I'm in a very privileged position where if I want to like make a change, I might be able to go and take that policy role and listen to the activists, and I can try and implement that policy. So like that's kind of like my goal, I guess. But.
All right.
Hi, so my name is Caroline. I'm actually from the University of Ottawa. I'm doing my master's in international development and globalization with Ruby. And a little personal thing that I want to say was brought up here. I'm actually from Montreal. I just came here from school, and we were talking about the floods. And if you know, in August, Montreal got a lot of floods, and my house personally got flooded. And like my mom works for an insurance company, and just in a day, one insurance company got 10,000 claims. So even we talk about a lot about the global South and the inequalities, but we as privileged as in Canada and in Quebec and in Ontario, we are starting to see the consequences. And a small hope that I got even after my house got flooded, we could see in my neighborhood and in the whole island, like people really for some people it was really traumatic, and you could see the start of a change in the mindset, okay, this is like something that's worth thinking about. So a little hope from that experience. And just another small thing that I wanted to say, and Morgan, you touched on it a little bit. If we talk about like a citizens' assembly, I think it's really important to keep in mind like diversity and diversity of lived experience. That could be gender, race, class, educational background, Indigenous knowledge, all of that's really, really rich, and I think we should just keep that in mind when we think about collective action. So yeah.
All right. Parfait. Are they amazing? They're amazing. We have their CVs if you want to hire them. There's no commission. All right, so I'm going to turn this over. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Just you can stay there if you want. To Roy, I think Roy and Susan first. Okay, before Susan comes up, she has been the catalyst to put all of this together strategically. So I think we really need to give her a vote of thanks and maybe even an ovation, if you don't mind. Woo!
Thank you.
Hey, Susan.
Thank you so much, and it is such a pleasure to hear everybody here and to have participated myself in all these things, because it is really inspiring and it's really lovely to see all of the young people. We ensured we had some on the program, and we are delighted. I think this is a really good idea of Ted to have you debrief with us. It's fabulous. And what it made me think of, actually, was my youth and working for women's rights and the advocacy. And the stages that we've talked about today are the same stages we went through in terms of the ad hoc committee on the Constitution, for example. So when I was in law school, there were only 20% of women in the law school then, but they did lots of research on inequalities in the law. So we had the research. We also had the collaboration, because if you're going to be in law school and you're going to be hassled, Louise Arbour was one of our professors, and the guys really hassled her. If you're going to be hassled, you're going to work together. So we were not alone, and that came up to do it together, and we had a lot of fun. In fact, the Women's Legal Education Fund started out over lunch, and we had food at everything. We had a lot of fun, a lot of jokes, and I think that was really important to our progress. Then we had an opportunity. We had the ad hoc committee on the Constitution, so we had an opportunity to change the law. So that gave us focus, and we talked about that as well over the last couple of days, the importance of having a focus and working together on the focus. Once we got the law changed, and that involved a lot of lobbying, MPs, senators, we even found out which ones had girls, and we also sent cupcakes to them all on Valentine's Day, all that kind of thing. We tried to make it fun as well. Then we had litigation, because if you've got a law, it's no good to you unless it's enforced properly. So we had education programs, and Ted's wife was also one of these people. Yeah, there you are. Sorry, I couldn't see you, Magda Zedegard. We had a program of education for decision makers. We just asked for money, got some people to give us money to do an education for the judges and the decision makers in the government. And we also had a way of reinforcing it, because then we had the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, which would take cases in the court when things were transgressed. So we actually changed the law that way, and we had a measurement of implementation of the law. So every one of those things we talked about in the last 2 days, and it's so wonderful to see that whole process now in chain on the survival of the species. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Well, it's left to me to close this meeting, but let me just add my thanks to a number of people and individuals. First of all, we had 15 or 16, I didn't quite add them all up properly, speakers. Let's have a round of applause for all of our speakers who were so fabulous and so invigorating in their addresses. Secondly, a round of applause to all of the rapporteurs who brought so much richness to the discussion, and their reflections are invaluable. So we'll see you again soon, I'm sure, sometime. For Ted Jackson for organizing them into such a potent force in the conference. Right. To the audience, I mean, the audience was fabulous in terms of adding thoughts, provocative questions, reflections. Thank you so much for your contributions, each and all of you. To the organizing committee, we've had a number of people involved. A special shout out to Gord Breedick, who's dealt with the AV and the setup of the conference. Thank you, Gord. And a round for Steve in the control tower. A particular shout out to Ruby, who's been running around doing a lot of the logistics in the background, and she's got a father in Lebanon who's afraid of, when and where the next bombs are going to fall. So she's been living with that every hour that she's been with us. Thank you, Ruby, so much. And finally, I was going to say something special about Susan, but let me just add to what Ted has already said. Susan, we couldn't have done this without you, and thank you so much for your inspiration, for your energy, and for your charm. Thanks again. So a few of us, or maybe a lot of us,